October 23, 1942. As darkness descends over the western desert of Egypt, the silence is shattered by a thunderous artillery barrage. 1,000 British guns open fire simultaneously, their shells screaming across the moonlit sand toward Axis positions at El Alamein. The barrage is so intense that the ground trembles 40 miles away in Alexandria. Flashes from muzzles create an artificial dawn along a 40-mile front. This is Operation Lightfoot, the offensive that will determine the fate of North Africa, the Middle East, and possibly the entire war. For 18 months, the war in the Western Desert has swung back and forth across the same barren landscape. British and Commonwealth forces have advanced, then retreated. The Germans and Italians have surged forward, then withdrawn. Tobruk has been besieged, relieved, and captured again. But now, at a small railway station called El Alamein, just 60 miles from Alexandria and the Suez Canal, the pendulum will stop swinging. One side will win decisively. The other will begin a retreat that will end only with total defeat in Tunisia, 7 months later. On one side stands Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated commander, architect of brilliant victories that brought Axis forces to Egypt's doorstep. Sick with jaundice and chronic stomach ailments, recalled from medical leave in Germany just days earlier, Rommel commands an army running out of fuel, ammunition, and time. His Afrika Korps and Italian allies hold fortified positions that stretch from the Mediterranean Sea to the impassable Qattara Depression, a natural barrier that prevents flanking maneuvers and forces any battle to be a frontal assault. On the other side stands Lieutenant General Bernard Law Montgomery, the meticulous, self-confident British commander who has spent 2 months preparing his 8th Army for this moment. With overwhelming superiority in men, tanks, artillery, and aircraft, with secure supply lines stretching back to Britain and America, with ultra-intelligence revealing Rommel's every shortage and weakness, Montgomery has planned a methodical, grinding battle of attrition. He promises Churchill not a quick victory, but a certain one. As the barrage lifts and infantry advances into the darkness behind creeping artillery fire, nobody, not the Scottish Highlanders moving forward in the north, not the Australian and New Zealand troops attacking in the center, not the South African and Indian divisions demonstrating in the south, not Rommel rushing back to his headquarters, not Churchill anxiously waiting in London, knows that the next 12 days will see the beginning of the end for Axis power in Africa. This is the story of El Alamein, where the tide of war turned, where Britain won its first major land victory over Germany, and where, as Churchill would later say, before Alamein we never had a victory. After Alamein we never had a defeat. The Western Desert Campaign had begun in 1940 when Italy, from its colony in Libya, invaded Egypt, where Britain maintained bases protecting the Suez Canal and Middle Eastern oil fields. The initial Italian advance was decisively defeated by smaller British forces in Operation Compass, which drove deep into Libya and captured thousands of Italian prisoners. Hitler, watching his Italian ally crumble, dispatched the Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel in February 1941. Rommel quickly demonstrated why he would become a legend. Ignoring orders to remain defensive, he attacked, driving British forces back across the territory they had just captured. For the next 18 months, the campaign became a seesaw battle across hundreds of miles of desert. The fighting developed unique characteristics. With no civilian population, few towns, and endless open desert, the war became mobile and fluid. Tank battles resembled naval engagements, with formations maneuvering for position across featureless terrain. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles, making logistics as important as tactics. The side that controlled the Mediterranean sea lanes could supply its forces, the side whose convoys were sunk went hungry. Rommel earned his reputation through bold attacks and tactical brilliance. He understood combined arms warfare, using his feared 88 anti-aircraft guns in anti-tank roles, coordinating infantry, armor, and artillery seamlessly and personally leading from the front. British commanders, rotating through a succession of leaders, Wavell, Auchinleck, Ritchie, struggled to match his operational skills. By June 1942, Rommel had captured Tobruk, a humiliating British defeat, and pushed into Egypt. On June 30th, the First Battle of El Alamein halted his advance just 60 miles from Alexandria. Both sides, exhausted and undersupplied, dug in. Through July and August, attacks and counterattacks produced stalemate. Rommel tried to break through at Alam el Halfa in late August, but was repulsed by the newly arrived Montgomery, who was implementing a new approach. No more retreats, no more improvisation, no more defeats. When Montgomery took command of 8th Army on August 13, 1942, he inherited a demoralized force that had suffered repeated defeats. His first actions were psychological. He exuded confidence, promised victory, and told his troops there would be no more retreating. His certainty, bordering on arrogance, proved infectious. Morale improved immediately. But Montgomery's approach was methodical, not rushed. Unlike his predecessors who had attacked before fully prepared, Montgomery would not move until everything was ready. Churchill pressured him for immediate action. Montgomery refused. He would attack when he was ready, not before. The preparation was comprehensive. New equipment poured into Egypt: Sherman tanks from America, self-propelled guns, trucks, aircraft. By October, 8th Army possessed overwhelming material superiority. 195,000 men versus 104,000 Axis troops. 1,029 tanks versus 547, of which only 278 were German. 2,311 artillery pieces versus 1,219. 750 operational aircraft versus 675. But the RAF enjoyed better maintenance and supply. Montgomery personally selected his corps commanders, ensuring he had leaders who understood his vision. Lieutenant General Oliver Leese would command XXX Corps in the north, the main attack force. Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks commanded XIII Corps in the south, which would conduct diversionary attacks. Lieutenant General Herbert Lumsden commanded X Corps, the armored reserve that would exploit any breakthrough. Training intensified. Troops practiced nighttime attacks, following artillery barrages, clearing minefields under fire. Engineers trained on mine detection and clearance, crucial skills, as Rommel had sown over 500,000 mines in defensive belts called the Devil's Gardens. Infantry and armor practiced coordination, overcoming the poor cooperation that had plagued previous British offensives. Intelligence gave Montgomery enormous advantage. Ultra-decrypts revealed Axis supply shortages, unit positions, even Rommel's absence on medical leave. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed German and Italian positions. Signal intelligence tracked radio transmissions. Montgomery knew more about Rommel's army than some German commanders knew. The plan, Operation Lightfoot, was straightforward. A massive artillery barrage, then infantry attacks to create corridors through minefields, followed by armor pushing through to engage German tanks. Montgomery expected a 12-day battle of attrition, crumbling the Axis forces gradually until they broke. There would be no brilliant flanking maneuver, no dramatic breakthrough, just methodical, grinding pressure that superior resources would inevitably win. At 21:40 hours on October 23rd, the barrage began. 1,000 guns firing together created noise beyond description. For 15 minutes, they pounded Axis forward positions. Then the fire shifted deeper, moving ahead of advancing infantry. The creeping barrage, timed precisely, was supposed to protect attackers while suppressing defenders. Infantry from 4 divisions, 51st Highland, 9th Australian, 2nd New Zealand, 1st South African, advanced behind the barrage. In the north, killed Scottish Highlanders played bagpipes as they moved forward through mine-strewn darkness. Engineers followed closely, marking cleared lanes through minefields with white tape. Behind them came tanks, waiting for paths to be cleared. Initial progress was good. Surprise was complete. German commanders had not expected a night attack. British infantry overran forward positions, taking prisoners and establishing footholds in Axis defenses. But as dawn approached, problems emerged. Mine clearance was slower than planned. Engineers worked frantically, but the density of mines exceeded intelligence estimates. Cleared corridors were narrower than needed. When armor tried to advance, tanks became bottlenecked in tight passages under German artillery fire. Some units lost direction in darkness and smoke. Communications broke down. The precise timetable began unraveling. By morning of October 24th, infantry had advanced several miles, but armor was stuck in minefields, unable to push through. German forces, recovering from initial shock, brought up reserves and counterattacked. The 15th Panzer Division and Italian Littorio Armored Division engaged British tanks in confused fighting around Kidney Ridge and Mightyria Ridge. Montgomery faced his first crisis. His plan called for armor to break through on the first night. Instead, tanks were still struggling through minefields, suffering casualties from German anti-tank guns. Corps commanders requested permission to withdraw and regroup. Montgomery refused categorically. There would be no withdrawal. Units would push forward whatever the cost. For the next 9 days, the battle became exactly what Montgomery predicted. A grinding slugfest where superior British resources slowly overwhelmed Axis defenses. The Germans called it Materialschlacht, material battle, where quantity mattered more than quality or tactical skill. Each day followed similar patterns. British forces attacked, suffering heavy casualties but inflicting even heavier losses on defenders who couldn't replace losses. German and Italian troops fought desperately, launching counterattacks that temporarily regained ground but expended irreplaceable men, tanks, and ammunition. Artillery duels raged continuously. Tank battles erupted wherever British armor managed to advance. Rommel, returning on October 25th, immediately grasped the danger. His forces were being ground down. Fuel shortages prevented mobile defense. Ammunition was rationed. The Luftwaffe was outnumbered and outfought. Every tank destroyed, every gun disabled, every soldier killed or wounded brought defeat closer. Montgomery continually shifted the focus of attacks, a tactic he called crumbling. Instead of pushing at one point, he would attack in the north, then switch to attacks in the center, then back north. This prevented Rommel from concentrating his limited reserves. German and Italian units had to stretch thin, never knowing where the next blow would fall. The fighting was savage. Australian troops fought brutal close-quarters battles for Point 29 and Thompson's Post. New Zealanders and British infantry attacked and re-attacked Mightyria Ridge. South African forces held defensive positions in the south, tying down Axis units. Casualties mounted on both sides, but Britain could replace losses, Germany could not. Tank battles were particularly costly. British Shermans and Grants faced German Panzer IIIs and IVs, with the dreaded 88 guns providing anti-tank support. British tank doctrine was still developing. Frontal attacks against prepared positions produced heavy losses, but British industry could ship replacement tanks. German tanks, once destroyed, were gone forever. Mine warfare characterized much of the fighting. Engineers cleared paths under fire while German artillery and mortars targeted the clearance efforts. Both sides laid new mines during lulls. The Devil's Gardens became charnel houses where disabled tanks burned and wounded men lay among the mines, impossible to evacuate. Air power played increasingly important roles. The RAF, enjoying numerical superiority, bombed Axis positions, supply convoys and airfields. German and Italian aircraft fought back but were gradually worn down. Control of the air gave British forces freedom of movement while constraining Axis operations. By November 1st, Axis forces were near breaking point. Fuel was critically low. Ammunition stocks were depleted. Tank strength had fallen below 100 operational vehicles. Italian divisions, poorly equipped and demoralized, were disintegrating. German units fought on from professionalism and discipline, but they knew the battle was lost. Montgomery, sensing the enemy weakening, launched his decisive blow. Operation Supercharge, beginning on November 2nd, concentrated overwhelming force at a narrow point in Axis lines. The 2nd New Zealand Division, reinforced by British infantry and armor, would smash through German defenses southwest of Kidney Ridge, opening a corridor for armored divisions to exploit. The attack began at 1:05 hours with another massive artillery barrage. Infantry moved forward behind creeping fire, advancing into German positions. The fighting was intense. German paratroopers and Italian infantry defended desperately. British casualties were heavy. The New Zealand Division alone suffered over 1,000 casualties, but the attack kept pushing forward. Behind the infantry came armor. The 9th Armored Brigade received orders to break through at all costs. They charged German anti-tank positions in daylight, virtual suicide for tank crews. Of 94 tanks that attacked, 75 were knocked out. But the charge broke German defenses. Gaps opened in Axis lines. More British armor poured through. The 1st Armored Division engaged remaining German tanks in battles around Tel el-Akakir. The fighting was confused and costly, but British numbers prevailed. By November 3rd, German tank strength had fallen to fewer than 30 operational vehicles. Rommel knew the position was hopeless. On November 3rd, Rommel made the painful decision to retreat. Fuel shortages meant many Italian units, lacking transportation, would have to be abandoned. German forces would withdraw westward, sacrificing non-mobile allies to save the Afrika Korps. Rommel requested permission from Hitler to conduct strategic withdrawal. Hitler's response, received November 3rd, was categorical. There can be no other thought but to stand fast, yield not a yard of ground, and throw every gun and every man into the battle. The order was militarily insane. Holding position meant annihilation. Rommel, for one of the few times in his career, considered disobeying orders. But ingrained discipline made him pause. For crucial hours on November 3rd, he attempted to hold position as ordered. The delay proved catastrophic. Montgomery, meanwhile, launched pursuit operations, but British forces, after 12 days of continuous fighting, were exhausted and disorganized. Pursuit was cautious and methodical rather than aggressive. Rommel, even in retreat, remained dangerous. British commanders feared counterattacks from the Desert Fox. On November 4th, facing complete destruction, Rommel ignored Hitler's order and withdrew. Italian divisions, unable to move, surrendered en masse. German forces conducted fighting retreat, using their remaining tanks and anti-tank guns to delay British pursuit. Rain on November turned desert tracks to mud, slowing British vehicles and allowing Axis forces to escape complete encirclement. Alamein was decided. Axis forces retreated westward, abandoning Libya entirely. They would not stop until reaching Tunisia, where they would make final stand. The British 8th Army pursued cautiously but relentlessly. The casualty figures tell the story. British and Commonwealth forces suffered approximately 13,560 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. Tank losses were heavy, over 500 tanks destroyed or disabled, though most could be recovered and repaired. Axis casualties were catastrophic. Approximately 30,000 Germans and Italians were killed or wounded. Another 30,000 became prisoners, mostly Italians from immobile divisions. Tank losses totaled nearly 450 vehicles, losses that couldn't be replaced. Artillery, vehicles, and supplies were abandoned during retreat. Strategically, Alamein transformed the war. The immediate threat to Egypt and the Suez Canal ended permanently. Middle Eastern oil fields were secured. The Mediterranean southern coast would soon be entirely in Allied hands. Most importantly, the myth of German invincibility was broken. If Rommel could be defeated, so could any German commander. Churchill's elation was carefully measured publicly but profound privately. Britain had waited 3 years for a clear land victory over Germany. Alamein provided that victory. It wasn't dramatic, no encirclement, no dramatic breakthrough, just relentless grinding attrition. But it was decisive. The timing was significant. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, began just days after Alamein on November 8th. Axis forces now faced British 8th Army advancing from the east and Anglo-American forces landing in Morocco and Algeria in the west. The Afrika Korps was caught between converging pincers with no escape. For Rommel, Alamein was bitter defeat. His health deteriorated further. His reputation, while still formidable, was tarnished. He would fight on in Tunisia, conducting brilliant defensive operations, but the strategic situation was hopeless. By May 1943, he would be recalled to Germany, and the Afrika Korps would surrender. Montgomery emerged from Alamein as Britain's most celebrated commander. His careful preparation, methodical approach, and decisive victory earned adulation. He was promoted to full general and knighted. Churchill, despite earlier frustrations with Montgomery's deliberate pace, praised him lavishly. But Alamein also revealed Montgomery's limitations. His pursuit of the defeated Axis forces was cautious and slow. Critics argued that a more aggressive pursuit could have trapped and destroyed Rommel's entire force. Instead, Rommel escaped with the core of his German units intact. Montgomery's defenders countered that the 8th Army was exhausted, that supply lines were stretched, and that Rommel, even in retreat, was dangerous. A hasty pursuit might have ended in disaster if Rommel counterattacked effectively. Better to advance methodically and consolidate gains than risk another defeat through overconfidence. The debate continues among historians. Was Montgomery's caution justified prudence or missed opportunity? Could Alamein have been the war-ending victory that destroyed Axis forces entirely? Or was the methodical approach the only realistic option given circumstances? What's undeniable is that Montgomery won. After years of defeats and retreats, British forces had decisively defeated a German army. The psychological impact was immense. British troops gained confidence. German troops lost their sense of invulnerability. The war's momentum had shifted. Alamein provided crucial lessons that shaped subsequent operations. The effectiveness of concentrated artillery was demonstrated conclusively. The use of mine warfare and countermines became doctrinal. The importance of air superiority was confirmed. The vulnerability of armor in frontal attacks against prepared positions influenced tank tactics. British forces learned that material superiority alone didn't guarantee victory without competent leadership and planning. Montgomery's methodical preparation contrasted sharply with earlier, hasty offensives that ended in disaster. Taking time to prepare properly, even under political pressure, proved justified. The battle confirmed the importance of logistics. Rommel's greatest enemy wasn't British tactics but his own fuel and ammunition shortages. The side that controlled sea lanes won the campaign. This lesson would apply throughout the war. Superior logistics defeated superior tactics. Intelligence also played crucial roles. Ultra-decrypts gave Montgomery knowledge of Axis weaknesses and plans. This intelligence advantage, carefully protected to avoid revealing the source, provided strategic and tactical benefits that tipped balances in close-run engagements. Alamein must be understood in context of global war situation in late 1942. On the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad raged, with Soviet forces beginning encirclement of German 6th Army. In the Pacific, American forces had won at Midway and were fighting on Guadalcanal. The tide was turning globally, not just in North Africa. Yet El Alamein had unique significance for Britain. Unlike Stalingrad's Soviet or Midway American, this was a British-led victory. After Dunkirk, Greece, Crete, Singapore, and Tobruk, a litany of defeats, Britain desperately needed proof it could win. El Alamein provided that proof. The victory also validated the peripheral strategy favored by Churchill. By defeating Axis forces in Africa, the Allies secured the Mediterranean, threatened southern Europe, and diverted German resources from other fronts. Whether this Mediterranean focus was optimal compared to earlier cross-channel invasion remains debated, but El Alamein made the strategy appear successful. For the United States, just beginning major combat operations with Operation Torch, El Alamein was reassuring. If British forces could defeat Germans decisively, then Anglo-American cooperation had prospects for success. The victory encouraged American confidence in British military competence. Behind statistics and strategy were tens of thousands of individuals experiencing modern warfare's horrors. Scottish Highlanders advancing through minefields, German paratroopers fighting to the last round, Italian soldiers surrendering because they lacked ammunition, tank crews burning to death in disabled vehicles, engineers clearing mines under fire, medical personnel treating endless streams of casualties. Individual acts of courage were commonplace. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Turner won the Victoria Cross for repeatedly exposing himself to enemy fire while organizing attacks. Rifleman John Bealey earned the Victoria Cross for single-handedly attacking machine gun nests. Hundreds of others displayed similar valor without recognition. The desert itself was an enemy. Daytime temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Nights were cold. Water was scarce and precious. Sandstorms disrupted operations. Flies and disease plagued both armies. Combat conditions were miserable beyond civilian imagination. For survivors, El Alamein remained defining experience. Veterans would remember the artillery barrages, the tank battles, the minefields, the comrades who died. Many would fight on through Tunisia, Sicily, Italy, and France. But El Alamein was where they learned their profession and proved themselves. El Alamein didn't end the war. Fighting continued for 2.5 more years, but it marked a fundamental shift. Before El Alamein, Axis forces were expanding, Allied forces retreating. After El Alamein, the trajectory reversed permanently. Churchill's famous assessment captured the battle's significance. Now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning. El Alamein was where Allied forces transitioned from defensive to offensive, from reactive to proactive, from hopping to survive to expecting to win. For Germany, El Alamein was a disaster but not yet catastrophe. Stalingrad, occurring simultaneously, was far more costly in lives and prestige. But El Alamein, combined with Operation Torch, meant Africa was lost. Resources expended trying to hold Tunisia would be wasted. Italy would be invaded. The Mediterranean would be secured. Each consequence weakened Germany's overall strategic position. For Britain, the victory's importance transcended military achievements. National morale, severely tested by years of defeats, surged. The British Army had proven it could fight and win. Montgomery became a national hero. Church bells rang across Britain for the first time since 1940. Previously, they were reserved for invasion warnings. The psychology of the nation shifted from anxious defense to confident offense. The battle also represented evolution in British military competence. The army that fought at El Alamein was vastly improved from the force that evacuated Dunkirk. Better equipment, better training, better leadership, and hard-earned experience combined to create an effective fighting force. The learning curve had been steep and costly, but by El Alamein, British forces had mastered modern warfare. In the vast narrative of World War II, El Alamein occupies a curious place. It's celebrated in Britain as the turning point, but is less prominent in American or Soviet war narratives where Midway or Stalingrad loom larger. Yet for British Commonwealth forces, British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian. Alamein was their battle, their victory, their proof that the war could be won. The Desert War had its own character, fought far from civilians, across barren landscapes, between professional armies that often respected each other even as they fought. Rommel and Montgomery would never meet during the war but would later correspond. The Afrika Korps and 8th Army developed mutual respect. It was war, certainly, but war with boundaries, rules, and strange courtesies that would be absent from later, grimmer campaigns. Today, the battlefield is marked with memorials: British, German, Italian, Commonwealth. The desert has largely reclaimed the trenches, minefields, and tank positions. But the memory persists, kept alive by veterans' accounts, by historian studies, by the simple fact that at a small railway station called Alamein in the autumn of 1942, the tide of war turned, and the long road to Allied victory truly began.